Hey there and welcome to the channel. You're watching The Light in My Library. So today we're going to be finishing up our reread of The Alloy of Law. For those of you who have been following along, this is our fourth reread video for The Alloy of Law. I've broken it down into 5 or 6 chapter chunks for each week, and there's a playlist that might be displaying up above right now. If not, it is definitely linked in the video description. So check the doobly-doo if you want to take a look at the rest of the series. Next week, I'm going to be doing a review of the book as a whole, and then the week after that, we'll be starting up with our reread of The Shadows of Self, which would be 7 chapters every week. 7 and 8 one week, I think, is the numbers. But there's an actual description of it below, and my light is slowly falling down, so quick cut while I fix that. Okay, so I hope you'll ignore those difficulties in the production. We'll be jumping into the summary section of this video, which will be followed by my thoughts on each chapter, and probably a brief spoiler section. We'll see when we get there. For Mistborn as a whole and the Cosmere, I'm not sure exactly what all I have to say. We will have some theory speculation videos probably the week before the Lost Metal, so if I don't get to what I have to say here, we will get to it later. Alright, so last week we finished off chapter 15 with the final stage of the planning at Renette's house with Wax and Marisi having a quick conversation. We start out this week's chapter 16, with Wayne going in disguise to the train station as a woman, briefly getting some information out of one of the Tekiel-Haas guards for the Break-Knot train, and then quickly switching disguises a couple times until he ends up on the guard duty for the train. And then we see Wax running up in a staged firefight from Wax, Wayne, and Marisi, which ends with Wax getting thrown into the train car, it getting locked on a timed mechanism, and Wayne talking to the people outside into sending the train along the tracks anyways. In the next chapter, we see the actual capture of the Break-Knot train car from the perspective of Marisi and also from the perspective of Miles. We finally get to see the mechanism by which the Vanishers are capturing the train cars, which is just to kind of lower a crane over the train car, hitch it up, and move it and replace it with a carbon copy. I have some thoughts on that real fast in the following section, but we'll talk about it then. The chapter ends with Miles taking the train and its cargo and Wax inside back to the Vanisher headquarters underneath the Iron Spine Tower and beginning to blow it off, ripping the door off of the train car, which ends, the chapter ends, with Wax detonating a bomb inside of the Vanisher HQ. Chapter 18 sees the bulk of the fighting between Wax, Wayne, and Marisi and the Vanishers. Wax scales the side of the Ironside building while fighting off Push and Pull, the 2 henchmen of Mr. Suit. He also talks to Marisi briefly. We see a scene from Wayne's perspective where he is fighting some people. He sees Wax get injured. Wax hides. And we see the first conversation between Wax and Harmony. Those of you who have read Mistborn Era 1, which I am keeping this series as spoiler-free for Mistborn Era 1 as I can, but those who have read Mistborn Era 1 know who Harmony is. They're happy to see him, happy to have this interaction, and it is so well written within that character's voice, and it is just a pleasure. We get almost a page of interaction between Wax and Harmony, and it is just a pleasure to read from start to end. I probably should include that in the thoughts section, but we'll put it in here in the summary. And the fighting continues. the next chapter, we see Wax push his way all the way through to the end of the tunnel, fight his way up through the hideout house that's at the end of that short subway section of train rail, and find Steris. And then he frees Steris, he frees the gunsmith who was imprisoned with her, pushes him into the canal, sends Steris to run off to the police station to get some reinforcements. He goes back down into the tunnels, confronts Miles and Marisi. There's a really good payoff scene here about the shooting a bullet at the head of somebody holding a hostage. That is a very good callback and also payoff for what we see in the prologue. And then Marisi slows down the time, and Wax and Wayne have a fight. There's a lot of dialogue, and it ends with Miles finally realizing, I think that I accidentally just mixed up Miles and Wayne when I was talking about names a minute ago, but Miles realizing that Marisi has had her speed bubble up the whole time, which is the opposite of Wayne's kind of speed bubble, where it slows down time for those on the inside instead of speeding it up. And Miles gets captured by 100 to 200, no exact numbers given, police officers who beat him into submission, and the day is saved. We move on to chapter 20, where we have some brief wrap-up. We see a conversation between Wax and Marisi, where Wax kind of finally firmly shoots down her feelings for him and thinks about how he does have those same feelings, but it's just not the right time in his life for someone like Marisi. She reminds him too much of Lessie, his former wife. Then there's an interaction between him and Steris, where Steris is stiff and formal and rigid and seemingly heartless again. But again, Steris is the best character. Hands down, one of my favorite characters in all of fiction. But she comes off very cold and stiff here in this scene, and she proposes that Wax and her speed up the timeline of their relationship, of their courtship, and go about it much more quickly. And it ends with Wax having that thought that I already mentioned, that Marisi is too similar to Lessie, and him agreeing to speed up the courtship. There's also an interaction between There's also an interaction here between Wax and the constables, where the constable general for Ellendale is acting and behaving very differently than he did back in, chapter 7 or 8, the last time we saw him. Almost as if he kind of got his fish got and is on his back foot because of Wax's behavior throughout the book. And he offers Wax deputization so that he can operate throughout the entire city, not above the law, but ordained by the law, but not an actual member of the constable group. That's what we're going with. We also see here in the conversation between Wax and Steris, Wax telling her pretty point blank, I'm going to continue to fight crime. I'm not giving this up. This is what I am going to do with my life now and moving forward. And Steris basically saying, well, I'd be dead without you doing that, so I'm just going to accept it. In the epilogue, we see Marisi witnessing the death of Miles by firing squad. He has managed to hide a gold mine somewhere on his person, presumably lodged in his body. Probably not ingested, but actually cut into his leg or something, or his arm. Kind of a gruesome detail, but it's kind of the only possibility, presumably. Yeah, I mean, it's been a week, so he would have passed anything that he had ingested through his system. It has to be something that he cut into his body. And as he is dying, he mentions the name Trell. Then Maurice sees a figure leaving from the execution room. She follows it. She feels a strong feeling she's being rioted by a zinc burner. She follows this dark, mysterious figure, and it turns out that it is Iron Eyes. Those of us who know who that is from the first trilogy. She has a conversation with Iron Eyes, and he gives her a book, tells her that she is doing his brother's work, and that she needs to give that book to Waxillium. That whole scene is intercut with Wax's POV, where he boards a train, finds a specific cabin within the train, and sits and waits for Mr. Suit, who is then revealed to be his uncle, Edwarn Ladrian. Ladrian? I'm gonna stick with that one. Who we have presumed to be dead throughout the entire book. It's revealed here that the numbers that Wax saw on the inside of the cigar case in earlier chapters, Miles' cigar case, these are the numbers that led to Wax being able to find the specific train that his uncle is taking here. They have a conversation where they posture and threaten each other, and it ends with Wax basically realizing that the entire point of the Vanishers from Suit, Mr. Suit, his uncle's perspective, and the set, the other people who are on the same team as Edwarn Ladrian, were basically using the Vanishers to commit insurance fraud and to collapse House Tikiel. And then there's some bluffing and some boisterous, some braggadocious behavior here between the two of them, and it ends with Leandrian throwing Wax off of the train because he just has more manpower than Wax has in that moment. He has a lot of bodyguards around. They throw him off. He goes back and has a brief conversation with Wayne about how he traded his uncle's appointment book, which he very cleverly stole from him, in exchange for a threat and a promise. The threat being that he was going to kill him, and the promise being the same thing. So, that is the summary, and we finally finished The Alloy of Law, Book 1 of Mistborn Era 2 by Brandon Sanderson. We're going to get briefly into thoughts. On this section of the book, but I will warn you now that I don't have quite as many thoughts. Something or other about action scenes just doesn't lend itself to a lot of depth in literary criticism. It's just very exciting to read. So while these are some of my favorite chapters in the books, in the book, I have quite a bit less to say about them than I do about a lot of the earlier chapters. So, starting all the way back with chapter 16, I really do love the way that Wayne gets so into character as he takes on these disguises. And I really do like the character trait of Wayne's, that he is kind of a master of disguise. But there's a specific part where he interacts with a bunch of rude kids. He's dressed up as the old lady, and he interacts with a bunch of rude kids that won't make way for him. And then one of them does make way for him, and in the old lady voice in his head to himself, he thinks, "What a nice boy." And I just really like how into character Wayne gets just in his own head. Also, the whole ruse plan, whatever here, that Wax came up with to end up inside of the rail car was rather clever, I have to say, and well executed. Both within the narrative is something that we discover as we go on, and genuinely believable as something that would work. In the next chapter, chapter 17, where we finally get to see what they call the machine, the barge with the crane on it, that the Vanishers are using, I'm left wondering whether or not the Vanishers' plan here is actually cost effective. Now, we know that the set and Mr. Suit are willing to back it because they're not actually investing in the theft, they're investing in the insurance fraud, which the thefts are necessary for. My question is whether or not the Vanishers, independent of the set, would be able to turn a profit whatsoever, because they have to reconstruct an entire rail car, and it's kind of implied that the brake knot, the rail car that House Tekiel is using here, is a rather expensive construction, just in general, and so it really leaves me wondering whether or not making an entire replica of the train car just to replace the old one and take what seems like, honestly, a very small shipment of aluminum is even cost effective for the Vanishers. But that's just me thinking far too much about these books. I also, here for the first time, we get mentioned the detail that survivorists, people who worship Kelsier, scar themselves up their arms and on their neck, the same way that, obviously, Kelsier, the survivor Hatton, was scarred. And I really like this detail. It's very Catholic of them, with the self-flagellation that was practiced in the Middle Ages and things like that. I just think that it's another one of the very, very well thought out and well planned and planted real world analogs that Brandon Sanderson has here in Mistborn Era 2. Moving on to the next chapter, which 16, 17, 18, which is chapter 18, there is a particular line here that I would like to call into focus, just an interaction between Wax and Wayne that I particularly enjoyed, and it is can you handle the coin shot? Wayne says, if I can't handle it, it's time to retire. And then Wayne responds, is that what we call getting shot these days? And nothing particularly special about that line. It just made me laugh, and I thought I would draw some special attention to it here. Moving on from that, I have to say there's not a lot left for me that I have any special thoughts on here throughout the rest of the book. The visual of Miles pulling out the stick of dynamite to escape from netting is one of my favorite creative and innovative solutions to problem in the Mistborn world, and it's definitely not the sort of thing that a regular person or even a twin-born like Wax would think of as his solution to that sort of problem. And so props for Brandon for genuinely taking the time to think around the way that each and every single character would interact with the world and how it would be different for each of them. I kind of drew attention to the same thing in one of the earlier videos where Miles and Wax are having the fight on the train top, and Miles catches Wax off guard because Wax isn't used to fighting somebody with Miles's combination of powers, and then Wax turns right around and does the same thing because Miles isn't used to fighting somebody with Wax's specific interaction of powers. And that's same sort of thing here where they genuinely wouldn't know. And it would be the sort of thing that would catch them off guard. Moving on to chapter 19, we have one of my favorite visuals again from this book. I've definitely listed several others throughout the course of this series, but one of my favorite visuals from this book that sticks out to me a lot is when Wax shoots up into the sky above the Vanisher cabin, hut, whatever, and he withdraws all of his weight instantaneously from the metal mind and just absolutely demolishes the house underneath him using a steel push. is one of my favorite visuals, just flattening the whole thing from the whole book. And it's honestly not just from this book, but from the series Mistborn Era 2, and probably just Mistborn in general. It's one of my favorite visuals, and something that has definitely stuck with me. I also like the way that the climax calls back not just to Wax's character arc set up in the prologue, but also Maurice's character arc set up very early on, where she feels useless and her power is useless and things like that. The climax does a very good job of paying off both of these character arcs at the same time and giving room to both of these characters. Not so much to Wayne, as he just kind of runs off, but it's not Wayne's role in the story to be the center of attention here. Whereas it is definitely the role of Wax and Maurice to be the center of attention. Moving on to chapter 20, the last chapter of the book, I really love here Ceres's interactions. Again, like I was saying in the summary, she comes off as very cold, but her character really is one of the best characters in all of fiction, in my opinion. And this is just another example of the way where she just went through this very traumatic experience. Wax is kind of shocked and taken off guard to realize that she's a little bit aroused by her capture, which I just think is good characterization, because it's not something that Brandon writes for all of his female characters. Not only do most of his female characters never end up in a damsel in distress sort of situation like Ceres does, but those few characters, female characters that have ended up in a damsel in distress sort of situation, Ceres is the only one of them that is seemingly aroused by the whole situation. And it just lends further into her characterization. Ceres is a 10 out of 10 character. You cannot convince me otherwise. I absolutely love her and will always love her. And I am super excited to know that she has a larger POV section in The Lost Metal than she has had in these previous books. I am definitely looking forward to that. I'm a Ceres fanboy through and through, and I'm excited to see what happens with her character. Moving on to the epilogue. Oh my god, we get to see Marsh, and it is amazing. And he is Marsh, and also I kind of skipped over it earlier, but Sazed. So excited to see both of those characters. The one quick spoiler, Cosmere and otherwise section that I had to say, I'm going to say it, it's probably going to be like 10 seconds long, so I'll have my editor just flash up that spoiler warning on screen. Quick thing to say about Marsh's appearance is that I am not convinced that Marsh knows Kelsier is alive. I'm just not. Granted, this is the book that Spook wrote with Kelsier's help that he's handing to Maurice. But I'm still not convinced that Marsh actually knows Kelsier is alive. So, end of the spoiler section. It's really good to see Marsh here. It's also, the Mr. Suit reveal is pretty well telegraphed. It's not out of nowhere. But you definitely had to have been paying attention to guess that Mr. Suit was a returning character and not an absolutely new character. So, those are my thoughts on chapters 16 through the epilogue. We will be doing a review of the book as a whole next week on Monday, so keep an eye out for that. I will be putting out my Dresden 5 book review. I swear I'm going to record it, I promise you, this week. And also, I'm hoping to get to my Before They Are Hanged, which is book 2 of the First Law trilogy. I hope to also be getting that one out this week. So look forward to Dresden 5 probably on Friday or on Wednesday. And Before They Are Hanged, hopefully I get to it on Friday. But I haven't been known to be the most reliable for these sorts of things. If you liked this video, please do leave a comment, like the video, subscribe to the channel. All of these things really, really do help me grow this channel and get this series before more people, as I feel like this is a genuine resource that a lot of fans would like to have leading up to the next book. Also, I should probably give a shout out here for those few Brandon Sanderson fans who don't know. Do check out the 17thshard.com, and in specific, they have on the 17th Shard the Coppermind, which is the Brandon Sanderson fan Wikipedia, which I have used quite extensively in making this video series. In my notebook that you've seen me flipping through, I only write down my thoughts, and I don't write down the summaries to the chapters. And so I have quite extensively throughout this series been double checking the summaries on the Coppermind.net as I do these videos, just to make sure that I don't mix anything up when in the summary section. So definitely a shout out to them. I also have a Twitch where I swear, I promise, I actually do play video games every so often, if you want to hop over there and give me a follow. I have an Instagram and a Twitter, both at The Light in My Library, where I post my upcoming schedule, I chat with fans, and just generally have a good time. Thank you all for watching this video. I hope to see you.